So Nick, why don't you start? Why don't you, if you don't mind, how did we get here and what did you do? And then Brian and Mike, you guys chime in too. You guys are really going to run this call.
Yeah, so I'll start with kind of our initial conversation and the big picture. I'll let Brian kind of speak to the journey of how he arrived at the assets he has today, and then we'll go through the analysis and all that good stuff. So
yeah, and also
firstly,
let people know that this is like what you do. Like this is kind of your niche.
yeah, this is the fun stuff. I'm gonna see, okay, I can share my screen. All right. So I'll just do a quick overview. So I had an introductory call with Brian. In that call, we talked about kind of big picture, what's his goals, what's his objectives, what's he trying to accomplish with his investment properties, kind of what that vision looks like. We talked a little bit about each property as far as just the basics of it. When did you buy it? What was the price? Is there currently any type of add value or capital improvements that are on the schedule? Right. So like, do you have a roof that's coming due in a couple of years? Do you have plumbing, electrical, some of the larger ticket items where we know it's going to impact our cash flow? So what we did is I just put together a quick overview before I get into the more technical Excel sheet. And a couple things. One, so Brian, and Brian, I'll let you chime in on this to reaffirm what I'm saying, but the main objectives that we talked about for Brian was to, gain assets, build wealth, and generate cash flow. And one of the awesome things in this conversation, because I'd argue we're all guilty of it, our objectives and our, what we're trying to accomplish changes over the course of time. And like through the initial one, Brian, it was kind of realizing like, hey, we're saying we want to buy assets, we're saying we want to generate cash flow, but like, what's the pecking order here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the number one objective we're trying? Because of course you're going to build wealth by holding assets, but if cash flow is the number one objective, what you're going to try to accomplish or what you might look to reinvest into is going to obviously change. So Brian, just going into that, right? Just speaking to your journey of, accumulating assets over the course of time. We've got 4 detached properties, and Brian, I'll let you the purpose right now is just to kind of give him a basic intro of this is when I bought this property. This is how it came to fruition. Because some of these you bought from your clients.
Correct.
Obviously, want to touch on as well, right? Can we first buy the asset before we sell it? So Brian, just real quick, just jumping into a quick overview, I'll scroll through it, but Surreywood Place, the first asset you purchased. So, and also these do go into order of when you bought them first to what you last purchased.
Yeah, so Surreywood Place, that's the first house that I ever purchased back in 2008. I personally lived in it for up until 2015. And that was my primary residence.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to point out that right there, just as a good understanding of, okay, you didn't buy this asset to generate cash flow. You bought it because you moved into it and it turned into a rental by default in some sense.
Correct. Yeah, I bought that for $172,000 back in 2008, which is crazy to think that.
So just here's a quick, like, high level snapshot of the general asset performance. Right. So does anyone have any takeaways from what we just, the 2 minutes we talked about it? Any takeaways from looking at the sheet based on the story Brian gave us?
My main thing, Brian, and maybe this will come up later, but to Nick's point about building wealth or creating cash flow versus your first conversation to, today, what has that journey been like for you in discovering like what is the primary plan and putting that in pecking order?
It's kind of interesting. I'll let you know when I figure it out about which direction. Mine is really, it's always been about obtaining the assets, because the more assets that I obtain, the more wealth that will create. The cash flow for me has been a little bit more of an interesting battle to deal with, because all of these rents that I get are under market value, what I should be charging. Granted, I've had long-term tenants in all these properties. I've only had turnover one time in one property, but I think that's because I keep the rents extremely affordable. where I need to have come to Jesus with all of them and essentially bring the rents up.
Am I reading it correctly that this one you're actually losing money?
Yeah. So I did a cash out refi on this property of 152,000 last year. So I was in the green. My mortgage was probably $1,100 a month, principal, interest, taxes, insurance. And then I took out 152,000 against this property, and it essentially had my payment go up to where now I'm actually losing money on an annual basis on this property. But honestly, I took the 152 out, and that's the money that I've used to obtain this other asset and doing the renovation on.
And one thing I want to point out is we're going to have a sheet that's going to cover all these numbers, right? And that right now is kind of the narrative side of it. And then we'll get into the back end where we get into the numbers and make sure you guys are all brain damaged by the time we get off the call.
All right, continue.
So, but that's a great example, Brian, of how everyone's journey is different. And there's a lot of things that we're measuring. It's not just a financial number of, hey, Brian, what's your cash on cash? Oh, that sucks. Let's go find a different property. It's, well, yeah, you're getting negative $236 a month. And yet this allowed you to leverage into two more or one more asset.
Just one more.
Just one more. So it allowed you to buy another asset. And so that's part of the story that we don't get by just looking at the numbers of the asset.
Yeah.
And that's also another example of why your portfolio might not directly replicate what your goals or objectives are. Like, oh, my goal is cash flow. So look at how much cash flow these properties are getting, because that's like a linear journey investor that doesn't really exist, right? Like no one's that perfect that they just line them up all perfectly exactly how they wanted to. And it wasn't just something that hit them in the face. Because in our business, opportunities hit us in the face, and sometimes it's not cash flow.
Yep.
Cool. Next one, Bob House.
Yep. So this was I bought this in 2015. It was a for sale by owner. Thomas had taught me into buying something a little closer to the office. So this is about 5 minutes around the corner from where I live, or from where I work. So I purchased that property for 250,000 is what I purchased it for. And then I lived in it until 2019. So from 2015 to 2019, until I purchased my primary residence, the home I'm in currently. I actually had past clients rent this house from me because I had sold their house and they didn't have a place to go. So they essentially just moved right in. I've never done anything to the home. It's just in its original condition from when I purchased it back in 2015.
Perfect.
So Eudora's kind of, yeah, Eudora is interesting. So all these are right here in the heart of South Charlotte and Valentine. So this was actually a mother of one of my wife's Bible study colleagues. And then Megan was in this meeting and said, hey, Julie said, do you think that Brian would talk to my mom about selling or purchasing this property? So this was right when COVID happened back in 2020. So I went and met with her, and she says, I don't want to show it. I don't want to sell it or I don't want to list it. I just want to sell it. So I said, okay, great. Well, I'll make you an offer. So I purchased this for $213,000. And then I let her live in it for a few months until her house was built. And then I put about $25,000 into it to renovate it. And it's been a rental ever since.
One note on that, Brian, is that was this the one, or was it the fourth one that you did the cost seg on?
I did a cost segregation study on this one.
Okay, perfect.
Last year on my taxes.
So Brian did a cost seg on this, and then Brian, how much did you write off from that cost seg?
This is probably somewhat embarrassing. I don't really know the number. I just know that with all the stuff that I did last year on my tax, it saved me about $40,000 between this cost seg study, purchasing a truck, and a few other things. It was about $40,000 in taxes that it saved me.
So that's just the other part I want to mention is, right, we're talking about tax, mitigation, and also depreciation, and how can we use assets to offset cash, because that's also an unrealized return. So this property is generating good cash, and it's also affording Brian the opportunity to write off more to save income. And yet that's also going to present a new conversation or consideration, right? Because now you're not going to have the same offset every year for the income. Right now you're going to start actually having income that's going to see your bottom line for taxes.
Correct.
And last one, Cambridge Bay. This was the last one you just purchased, right, Brian?
Yeah, so I just purchased this. This was a client that I've been working with for like 3 years, trying to find a home to purchase. They never they were real picky about what they wanted. Anyway, long story short, it was on and off for about 3 years. I got this random text one day that said, hey, do you still want to buy these guns? And then I was like, well, sure. So then I got the next text was, hey, do you still want to sell my house? So it kind of intrigued me a little bit. So of course I called it, and it was Doug. And then, so I went out and met them, and they said, well, look, we need to sell the house like right now. I said, okay, in this neighborhood, it trends very well. We could list it at 375. We'll probably fetch more, even based on the market. But I said, what's your out the door price right now? So they sold it to me for $325,000. And then
So,
I
another
bought
example where you didn't buy it with the aim or the lens of cash flow.
Correct.
It was opportunity knocked on my front door.
Well, it was interesting. So I mean, this one came, I put 25% down, which was 80 grand, about 51,000 into the renovation right now. So that's about 142,000. And I used that money that I took out of my first property at the Surreywood Place property. It was interesting. Right before I bought this house, I saw the video on social media that homes, you know, in the future, you think about, most of us have children, that homes are going to be unaffordable for our kids. So I thought about this for two things. It was, you know, obtain the asset for a good deal. This thing will always cash flow because of the community that it's in. Like the resale value in this community is top notch. But then I thought about, let me purchase this for my kids, and this will be essentially their college fund in the future. So both my children are young, 4 and 6. Somebody's going to pay for this thing over the next 15, 20 years. And, you know, they can fight for it when they get a little older.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So can you guys tell me, is it picking up what I'm pulling up here, or is it still on the asset performance?
Still the asset performance.
Yeah.
What'd you guys take out of the first 10 minutes there before you even pulled the next thing? Any observations or comments, thoughts, ahas, whatever?
People, not always, but there's always opportunity for convenience, and people still really much so want convenience. So when you go into your listing appointments, how can you purchase that property, or how can you give them an options menu?
Yeah, I love that. Cool.
To me, it was just an example of, as long as you're committed to investing into assets, you're not necessarily, Brian's not losing. He's winning by accumulating assets and building wealth. But when we look at the story now, it's just a matter of saying, okay, what am I really trying to accomplish? And we're going to find out, right? Whether Brian makes a change in his reinvestment or whether he doesn't. But either way, we're still moving forward, right? Perfection, or progress over perfection, rather, as far as he's got 4 assets, right? Or 5 rather, with his primary. So, all right, everyone can see my Excel sheet with all kinds of dings and bings and numbers and all kinds of good stuff. So this is just a great example of, first and foremost, through my process, and Jeremy, we talked about this, how do I make it frictionless with the client, right? Because there's a lot of information and numbers that you should have if you want to actually provide good information and advice and be able to analyze their current position. So with this, if we just start with Surreywood, we have all the information here that Brian discussed in the narrative, right? What he purchased it for, his initial investment. So one thing I want to mention here is just pay attention to what the story is from what Brian said relative to what the stories, the numbers tell us, because we could almost work Brian's story backwards just by looking at the numbers. Hopefully I didn't lose you there, but you'll see what I'm saying. And Michael can attest to this, because me and Michael did a call where we went over Brian's portfolio and we talked about it, right, Michael? We said, okay, here's the properties, what's going on with these ones? Like, what initially, Michael, what was your initial observations when we talked about it and looked over it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, and that was one thing we dove in about, but it was definitely trying to see how much equity he had in all of them. From a standpoint, I mean, you see it on there, like the almost $700,000 versus what his actual cash flow was. But also knowing that, you know, the appreciation he's gotten in just a few years was pretty insane as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and also one thing I want to note is, so I use the term net equity, a lot of these financial metrics and calculations use the equity of the property, but quite frankly, the only equity that matters is the equity we could actually pull out upon a sale. So the net equity is going to be the equity times 93%. So I'm taking 7% off the top for closing costs and commission.
Well,
So
you can get someone to list it for like 4% though, can't you?
yeah, not someone who's going to be able to help them accomplish this type of journey. And that's the benefit of this. When people are having these conversations, just by virtue of having this conversation, you're immediately setting yourself apart. You're not even a realtor anymore. You're essentially an advisor. You're a real estate investment advisor, and you're helping them accumulate more wealth and figure out what they need to go and what they need to do next. So real quick, just as Michael talked about it, just some of the immediate takeaways is, okay, what's the net equity that we currently have? Right? If I sold all these assets, what would I have? How much money would I have sitting in the bank account? Perfect. How much am I generating per month off that equity? Right? How much am I generating per year? So does anyone without doing too much financial strain here have an idea of what the cash on cash is from that as far as the operating income and the net equity?
%5.
Anyone else? So this portfolio as a whole is operating at a cash on cash of 1.85%. So these are his numbers as far as for each property. Here's his cap rate. Here's his return on equity. Here's his return on investment. Here's his cash on cash and the cash on net equity. So one thing I want to point out too is the cash on cash is usually based on the initial investment, right? So we're taking what the cash flow is divided by the initial investment. Does anyone see why in this case those numbers might not be helpful for us?
Yep.
It's like you have a numerator that's bigger than the denominator, if that makes sense to you guys. So if you guys look at the equation over here for the formula, right? Net operating income plus appreciation plus principal buy down divided by initial investment. So does anyone have, by looking at this, does anyone have any like ahas or takeaways or like, oh, I can see why this doesn't make sense, or hey, this is phenomenal? Any type of ahas when you see these numbers? I hope the answer would be yes on this call.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen where most people are looking for cap rates at like at least 7 to 10% when they're looking at investment properties. So that's the only thing that I've obviously had knowledge of. So this is a lot of new information for me to see it like this, but that's the number that I've always seen, that people are like, if it's not 7% cap rate, then it's not worth it.
And one thing, thank you for mentioning that, Nathan. One thing I wanted to point out on that is we talk about a lot of these numbers, but we don't talk about when to use what number, right? Like using a cap rate helps you make a buying decision.
Mm-hmm.
Yet using a cap rate 10 years into an investment may or may not give you the information that's actually going to help you make a decision. Because again, personally, and again, this is why we could all be right in this conversation, because there's so many things we can take away. When I look at this information, the return on investment, return on equity, just tell me he did a really good job of buying properties. It doesn't tell me anything about his actual current performance of these assets. So looking at the return on, I mean, and just so that we're clear, a return on investment, I want people to understand these numbers. They're so damn big as a percentage, the computer doesn't even want to compute them. It's 1,562% is what it is for his Surrey wood. Oh, I'm sorry, for Bob House, 15.26. So we're moving the decimal over 2 places. So he's 3,446% on his return on investment for Surrey wood.
And that's because he bought it for 8,000 in cash, whatever it was.
Right, here's his initial investment on the right side.
Yep.
So it's like, this is a great lesson of understanding, like, what numbers are you using and how are you using them? Are you using them to make buying decisions? Are you using them to analyze your current performance? For me personally, what I care about is how hard is my money working for me? Right? Like, what is my money generating for me? So my cash on net equity is what I'm paying attention to. Because if I were going to sell the property, I'd have this money in my hand and I would be able to go invest it any which way I want to. So right now, how high of a return can someone make on their current cash? Just anything in your market. Does anyone want to throw a number out? If you could invest $100,000, how much could you make on that 100,000 in the next 12 months? And if you don't know, then we're probably not paying attention to what's available to invest in the market right now.
You mean in like in an investment side, on a real estate side?
Anything, 100,000, and you go put it into your son's Boy Scout cookie campaign.
10%.
Yeah, I mean, we usually see it like right around like like depending on how quick, how long the return is, anywhere from 15 to 20.
Anyone else? And does anyone else have anything right now in their market where, hey, I'm looking at properties where I could buy it right now and I could generate X%, or I could, if I had 100,000 down on a 300,000 purchase, I could generate X net per month. Because if you're looking in the market, no. Right, I'm looking daily in 3 different markets right now for multifamily, so I know what the market affords on it because I'm looking at it all the time.
Really quick, guys. When you have people that call you and say, hey, I have an investment property, what do you think I should do with it? How many of you are going to this level of detail, or really anything even close to this, on being the realtor of choice that they chose to ask that question to?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't take it anywhere near this level. I kind of take it back to what's important to them and find out, ask a bunch of questions, and then that gives me enough information to do what I need to do. I mean, I run numbers just to see true value and what it will rent for, and if I'm going to be in the green per month, if it makes sense to do it that way.
Is there an app, easy button, just plug in the numbers? Because I'm not great with numbers. To me, sit down and doing this is a daunting task. So is there like an app on anybody's phone you use real quick to do it?
I think you just plug in the numbers and then it pops up the percentages, right? Or at least for this Excel sheet.
Exactly. So this is a great example of, you know, all your numbers to be able to come up with a number that actually gives you meaningful information. Because that's the other thing is this helps us understand for our clients too, what are they paying attention to? Right? Like I just did a call last week on this same thing. I don't do this portfolio, just so we're clear. The asset performance document that I showed you is what I'll use. Most clients, I would never subject them to this Excel sheet, right? Because it would be too much. And yet on my call, it was like, hey, they really love this duplex that they were holding. But then I mentioned like, yeah, you can increase. Hey, by the way, what's the condition of the property? And they're like, yeah, I mean, it's clean. It's definitely needs some updates, but it's clean. And I started going through that. I was like, so does it need windows? Great. How old is the roof? Has the plumbing ever been changed, or is it still cast iron? Through that one conversation, it was like, wow, we didn't even think about that. So we're probably going to have to spend $40,000 over the next 5 years. That's just another reason why we need to sell this damn thing and get into something else. But just an example, it wasn't even about the return. It wasn't even about the cash flow. It was like, hey, just the idea of, man, we have to pull money out of our pocket to keep this thing going. That's not attractive.
Yep.
So I think just pointing out, again, the numbers are great and they really help us understand what to do, but they don't tell us everything, or we don't have a conversation about the entire picture with it. So Michael, to kick it to you, what we did is I said, Michael, great. I sent him over this sheet. I said, we got, of the assets that we have, we've got $664,000. Like, what would we do with this? And not even assuming we're going to sell all of them, right? Just like, what would we do to optimize this portfolio? So Michael, I'll kick it to you. What were your thoughts when you looked at this?
So
Michael, tell them where you live and all that stuff too.
yeah, so I'm in Cleveland. obviously like our market is a lot different than like a Charlotte or LA. Like you can get stuff a lot cheaper. So that was actually when Nick originally sent this to me and I saw $700,000 or $650,000 in net equity. I was like, shit, like, what do you want to buy? Like you can buy a block, you can buy whatever. It's almost too much. So like I actually printed this and went through it. And just after going through it really good, to be honest, kind of thought of selling. Obviously, you're not going to unload them all at once. You're going to take your time and go through them. But really thought of keeping Eudora because it's still doing, he just bought it, good returns, that kind of thing. The other three we were definitely talking about selling. Obviously, you would start probably with Servy Wood and kind of break it down from there. One thing I actually learned, so I've never done a 1031. One thing I learned from Nick, when you do a 1031, it's not the net equity, it's the whole sale price, right? Nick, am I correct in saying that? Yeah, it's the whole sale price. Say it again.
Explain that.
So like when you sell, say you sell Servy Wood, it's not that we have to reinvest the $71,000 net equity. It would actually be the sale price. So whatever it would actually sell for, the 370 or whatever. So that also changed kind of some of the game because again, so it wasn't even that I had to reinvest $660,000. It was like reinvesting like 1.5 to 2 million. That kind of thing too. And these are single family. So Nick might have more on the 1031 of what you can classify and get them into. But it's not, I don't think, Nick, you could tell me if I'm wrong, you could exactly throw these into like a commercial 20 unit, right?
You can, that's the benefit.
So Nick knows better 1031 people than I do, because that's one thing I've always been told we can't do. So one property, so I dove in and am I able to share my screen?
Yeah, let me go ahead and stop my, there we go.
That right there is a really important thing, by the way, though. The amount of things that you can 1031 into. Nick, didn't you tell me that you can buy like a buoy in the ocean?
Yeah, what is it, a mooring?
Yeah, you could 1031 into that.
I was like, what is that? Or hey, did you know, for those of you, Palm Springs or somewhere else where they've got the huge wind farms, you could buy one of those. There's an APN number for those. You can buy those as assets.
You can sell a single family home in wherever and go buy a wind farm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole like for like thing is a really interesting, like not a great description of what reality is.
Right. It's a phenomenal opportunity to leverage into larger assets or different assets and really create a mutual fund effect.
Yeah. Oil rights too. All right, Mike, go ahead.
So diving into this, one of my big things was actually wanting to get a property that I somewhat knew and knew the numbers on, and I didn't just want to find something listed. So I actually have a duplex that I sold this summer that kind of we used as like subject property. So 1 second.
Brian, is there any ahas that you've taken away from this while we've been on the call?
Yeah, that 1031 was interesting. Just let me get this straight. So if I were to sell all 4 properties and I 1031 that money, now I wouldn't have the 1.6 million because I'd only have basically the 665 in equity. Is that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. So I would have to reinvest that
with debt or bring in additional money or a combination of both.
Okay.
Can you guys see this?
Yep.
Sweet. All right. So this is the duplex. Again, we just sold it. It was a 3-bed, 1-bath on the first floor, 2-bed, 1-bath on the second floor. It was actually a California investor who was selling it, which was kind of cool too, because it wasn't someone local. She actually had just bought this property in 2019, at the end of 2019 for $100,000. So we sold it middle of summerish for 157. So same thing. I mean, in 2 years, she did nothing to it except for when we went to list it, the bottom unit was vacant. We did some paint and new carpet, and I think she had like $2,500 in it or something. So I mean, same thing with the appreciation. I mean, we're seeing the crazy appreciation in certain areas too. But this place, cool thing about it, the upstairs tenant was just getting ready to be raised. It was like Section 8 Cleveland Metro Housing Authority. They're actually getting raised to $900 a month, which is guaranteed income. So direct deposit at the first of the month from Section 8. That was actually probably still about $100 low, but their rent had never been raised in 12 years. It was $528. So they didn't want to get too crazy on it. The bottom unit easily rent $1,000 to $1,200. It was vacant, so you could pick your tenant, get them in there, get them in the door. I'll take you guys through the photos a little bit. Hold on, just so you can see.
So this place is $2,000 a month,
Yep, yeah, on a conservative side.
160 grand.
Noted.
Crazy.
Had vinyl windows. Again, we do good photos, but it's not it's not a shithole. You know what I mean? It's a decent property. Upstairs needed some work. So if you, 1 second. I'm not as organized as Nick, so I'll just apologize ahead.
You guys did a great job. Thank you for doing this.
When I'm telling you, when he originally sent me that spreadsheet, I was getting anxiety because it was intense. But once you print it, it's actually very nice once you print it if you work with investors at all. All right. Can you guys see this cash on cash spreadsheet that I have?
Yeah.
So just quick numbers on it. Again, this sold in the summer. You probably get even cheaper now. I wanted to get a duplex to where you could find more and not something that was like the holy grail one-off. Like this is a pretty common purchase kind of spot. So 155, did down payment. We did 20%, depending on your guys' lender. I mean, I had someone who we can do 15% up to 25. I did it at 20 to be in the middle. Upfront repairs, just at 3,000 because if you were to kick out the upstairs tenant or whatever, even if you just float it towards your closing cost, you have the expense. Low 124, 34,000 out of pocket, $2,000 a month rent. Again, that's conservative. You probably could bump it up a little bit, but I wanted to keep it pretty realistic. We did expenses, or I did them at 50%. That included your insurance, taxes. I don't know how popular it is for you guys in your areas. We have a lot in our lease agreements where we back charge the water and sewer bills to tenants. Do you guys, is that common in your guys' areas too?
I don't
Back charge. What does that mean? Like, don't they just put them in their name, or they got to pay extra?
Water and sewer in our area has to be in the owner's name.
Hmm.
So what it is in the lease, a lot of them will, it just became common probably in the last little bit, but they will send you like a back charge, or they'll charge you $50 extra on top of your rent a month for water and sewer. And then there's a thing in there that if you go over, they send you the bill and you send the thing. Just again, to keep in mind, but did 50% expenses. I did 6% of monthly debt. Again, depends on your lenders. Some are higher right now, some are lower, how you buy it. But on a pretty easy thing, again, 9% cash on cash return. $3,000 a month or $3,000 a year cash flow isn't anything grand. But like Nick and I were talking, selling one of his properties, you would technically buy like 2 to 3 of these, to where now you're talking, $12,000 a year in cash flow, $1,000 a month.
And that was equal to his entire monthly portfolio before, right?
Correct. And you still had, you still could, take your time selling. I know like some of them might have needed some repairs or whatnot if he was going to sell them and, that kind of thing. But my big thing was, again, I just didn't want to find something that wasn't possible. Like this is pretty common and it's not hard to find.
So Nick, it has to be 2 or 3 properties, right? Because on 1031s, don't you have to do equal or greater value of what you sell? So he couldn't just do this one, right?
Well, he could, but he would still get crushed on taxes.
Get hammered, yeah, right.
You can do
Okay.
a partial exchange. right? You're just gonna pay, you know, boot or taxes on the delta between what you
Sure.
reinvest versus what you sold it for. So
Sure.
in this case, Michael, like I would put more leverage down on these assets, obviously. Because he has the cash for it. But this is where I would say it's going to be much more difficult with that sum of money to replicate that same position 5 or 10 times. So this would be a good example where we could take this money and leverage up into multifamily dwellings, right? Apartment building. So you're only buying a couple of them. See, in my market, it's, I guess it's similar in the sense that most of my clients are reinvesting out of San Diego because they have a huge equity. But the flip side is that how do you make sure you don't leverage into, there's not too many assets to leverage into.
Right.
So,
And one thing Nick and I talked about too, the problem we see locally on like our larger portfolios, commercial buildings, is everyone from California is buying them. And so like stuff here that we look at as investors, we're like, man, that's not making good money. The California, Washington, anything out west, like buying them up. Aaron can speak to that too, but that's why like we always try to look at an apartment that it's sold before. So that's why we try to stay down the duplex, triplex, maybe a quadplex.
And then also the cost seg report on all these properties that you buy too is another added benefit.
Now, is that the same? Is that greater or equal value on a cost seg? Don't you get penalized if you sell a cost seg property and you buy something else that's lesser value?
good point. I'm not aware of that, but
Clearly, I'm not either. I'm just asking.
I would think, you know, how it works with an exchange too is like this is another example. A lot of my clients have depleted depreciation tables, meaning they've owned this asset for 27.5 years or greater. So they have a zero cost basis. They have no offsets per write-offs. And typically they have a huge pile of equity. So when they go to reinvest it, let's say they sell here a detached property for $1 million, they would have to buy up to get more depreciation table, right? So if they bought up, so they took $1 million, they leveraged it into a $2 million apartment complex. The $1 million delta is what they can take a new depreciation table from, but obviously they only depreciate off the improved value, not the land. So let's just say 700,000 of that additional $1 million would be a new depreciation schedule for him. So that's to say, like, I don't think, Colton, as long as you leveraged up on the cost seg model and you got more than, there might be some kind of payback, but I think that's a good question, actually. Right, I'll have to check into that. Because through Brian's company, I found out they're actually here in San Diego who did the cost seg, and now they're doing one for me. So, but the other thing I wanted to flip to real quick, just to show you the end piece of this is, and what I love about this is we all have access to this. So this is a document from Keller Inc. Resources. Keller Inc. Resources hold worksheet, 30-year hold worksheet. And this is important because the one thing we didn't do in this is just make sure that we're talking apples to apples. So what I mean by that is using the same sheets. So like when I'm helping a client figure out whether they should reinvest, I'm filling this out for the purchase so they can clearly see, oh, here's my net cash flow. Oh, that's double what I'm currently getting, right? Then I go to my analysis here. Oops, wrong one. But you can see this is the cash on cash, right? So he's getting a 6% cash on cash in year one, which is already exceeding, right, the assets that he owns. This is a 300,000 purchase. This is a fourplex. Now, the kicker with this area and this location, which some of you probably know, is the property taxes are awful. Yet, even with awful property taxes, we're still able to generate almost 500 cash flow. And this is a property that's on the market for sale. So this isn't like looking back. This is today with today's rate, everything. So what I have to do is I reach out to agents in other markets and say, hey, perfect example. I've got a client who's got 2 condos in San Diego. His net cash flow for both of them is like $300, and he's got about $300,000 in cash from these properties. Do you have a couple assets in your market where if you could buy them right now, you could double that cash flow? And then all the agent needs to do is find an active, right, or pending or something that knows coming up, fill this out, kick it over. Oh, perfect. Yeah, here's the net cash flow. Actually, we just doubled his cash flow. And then the client could say, oh, this makes sense. Okay, let's move forward and sell them. So wanted to make sure I brought that kind of full picture of what this looks like for a client, because this will be the next thing for Brian, right? Is we'd say, okay, Brian, which properties, you know what I mean? Of the 4, let's take the one that's negative $200 a month and just agree that's one we should definitely reinvest. Maybe you keep the other 3 right now and that's fine, but let's replace the money for that, right? And then that's where we would use this sheet and say, great, we're going to start looking at assets available on the market, using this sheet to make decisions. And when we find the right one that's got the right buy signal for the cash on cash, we're jumping on it. So you already know what your reinvestment position looks like before you even sell your asset. So that's one thing I want to mention to you guys, is like 1031 exchange says you have 45 days to identify. And yet the reality is when you're working with the right professionals, we have way more time, because I'm already talking to the client about what we're looking at to reinvest into and getting clarity on that before we even list their property.
Right.
So they have the confidence to know, okay, there are decisions that I can make right now that if I bought them would better my position. That gives me the confidence to move forward and list this thing and put it on the market, because I can better my position.
Nick, are most of your clients that you do this for, are they making their decisions just based on numbers or off of emotions too?
Both. I've got, so a couple examples this year. I've got a lady who's 93 who sold 2 condos and then bought a new construction in Idaho. Right, so she simplified because she had 2 completely outdated condos in a different state. So now she has a new construction asset that she's going to pass on to her son who lives in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually cash flowed better because she was so far behind on market rents and repairs locally here. So that's another great example for clients, especially older ones. Hey, let's sell this dilapidated property. It's going to be about 50,000 over the next 5 years. And then let's reinvest into another state with new construction. You'll have no really calls or repairs to report of for the next decade. How does that sound? Perfect. Sounds great.
So what's the overall opinion? If Brian's your client, what's your overall suggestion for him?
Well, looking at this information, Brian, based on this information, what are you committed to as far as improving your portfolio? Or what do you recognize as being an immediate need or motivation of yours from this conversation?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, it's kind of funny you asked that question, Jeremy, on the emotion, because that Surwood probably is the first house I ever owned. But yet at this point in time, it's not about the emotion. It's about really making some money and some good choices to help better my investment. So, I mean, I'll sell Surwood and buy 2 of those little duplex things that you got up there, Michael. So find me 2 of those and I'll buy. My wife just yelled at me through the other room. She said that.
What's been your primary reason for keeping them? It has just been like kind of, I mean, just emotion, or
it's been the emotion. Yeah, hands down. It's been the emotion for Surwood. You know, first house I ever owned, first house I ever lived in. But I mean, I'm 42 years old. I'm highly unlikely I'm ever going to go back and live there. So at this point, it's really just about the money.
Sounds like if you don't sell it, you're going to be living there soon.
do you like, and just from the market standpoint, like if you waited 6 months, do you think you would see a negative drop on anything as well? Like, I don't know how your guys' market is there, whereas ours has adjusted a pretty good amount.
Yeah, ours is adjusted, although there's still a huge draw here. I mean, the cost of living is very reasonable. There's a lot of opportunities here in the Charlotte area. So there's a lot of people per day relocating here. I don't think it'd take a big hit. But then again, who knows? You know, who knows where the market's going to be at that point in time.
Likely to go up or down?
We'll probably go down in the next 6 months. And then obviously it'll take a little bit more time before it gets back up to what we've been seeing with all this appreciation over the last couple of years.
So if the goal is to sell for as much money as possible, it's either sell now or sell in how long? What would your crystal ball be? How many years?
Should I know my leases got another 4 months on it? Sell it now and go do it. The goal is to buy 2 more properties next year. So, and I got to get the cash flow
My
up.
question specifically was though, if the goal is to sell for as much money as possible, option one, sell now. And the waiting option for it to come back to more than you think it's worth today, in your crystal ball, how long of a time period is that?
7 years.
So what would you rather do? Get the property sold now or wait 7 more years?
Yeah, it'd be sell it now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sign the contract.
Yeah, press hard, 3 copies. You charge 10%? Shoot, yeah, I'll do it. 10%. But
Okay,
so now, but going in there and like, go ahead.
Selling Surreywood and buying 2 of those condos. And is the thought process to keep the other 3?
Well, let me ask you guys a question because Cambridge it's been giving me a little bit of a anxiety. I just bought that property, but my question is, should I turn around and sell it? So I bought it for 325. I'm in it another 51. So I'm in about 142,000, but I could turn around and sell it right now. One more down. And 465 was being somewhat conservative on that number. But what kind of, obviously I'd owned it for less than a year. So I get hit with, well, what, 35% in capital gains tax?
When do you hit?
That's where things are a little gray, actually. In the 1031 exchange, there's actually no verbiage that says how long you're supposed to hold the asset to qualify, which is kind of interesting.
Do you get taxed or do you not?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You 1031 exchange it. There's nothing that says you can't.
Okay, so you could 1031 this and roll over, $220,000 of equity. And buy what, Michael, 2 more of yours? No, 1.5. Yeah,
You like 5 of those that Michael should.
Yeah, I mean, it's only like a $34,000 investment.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, 220 is the equity, not the purchase price.
But it's got purchase price 465. So yeah, I mean 3 of them easy.
And your cash flow, how much?
It was 9%. Like you'd be cash flowing like 12 grand a year, something like that.
For all 3?
Yeah, 12 to 13, something like that.
So over
36,000.
Over double what you're getting from that property. No.
My question for you on Cambridge was, as soon as you bought that, why didn't you just put a for sale sign in the yard? Like it was like you had instant, I mean, you just bought it, right? Like you had instant equity. Why not just
Flip it, basically. Yeah.
flip it?
Yeah, it was the renovation to keep it and hold it because that neighborhood trades very well. So my intention was to hold that asset.
And this
So
was
what should it be renting at then?
What's that?
What's market rent then on it?
It's
Market rent. Yeah, about 24. I haven't put a body in, like it's still being finished, being renovated. Yeah. But it's about 2,400, 2,500 a month.
I think without deciding, Brian, your strategy has been appreciation and equity.
Correct.
And
Cash flow didn't hurt. But it was ironic. Before we even started doing this call back pre-COVID, I would take the extra, the net per month, and I would roll it into the mortgage. So I was intending on paying off all these mortgages early. And then I don't know, one of you guys had the idea. It was like, why don't you just take that money and put it into an account so you have the money? I was like, that's a pretty good idea. So it was like after the first year, I had $17,000 set aside, and I was like, oh well, there we go.
I mean, I don't think anything you do is wrong. I mean, again, you're sitting on mad equity on these houses, and you could sell them. You could sell one at a time. What I mean? Play the appreciation game, which some people are okay with because it's your market. You know it better than anybody. So, I think you just need to keep buying clients' houses or going in with that mindset if you have the ability.
I would suggest,
But like if you're emotionally attached, why don't you just raise the rent?
Yeah, that's the next one. The rent's going up.
yeah, I mean, I see it goes back to still the first question is, what's your goal?
Yeah. Are you trying to increase your monthly revenue?
Well, the goal is I want $15,000 a month in passive income. $15,000 a month in passive income. That's a very comfortable life. I'm not going to have to work. Would I stop? No, but $15,000 a month, I could I could pretty much just live comfortably off the investments that I have.
And you want to do that, what, like a 5-year goal, 10-year goal?
I'll do it today if you give me $15,000.
I guess
I do it right now.
losing $236 a month doesn't fit that vision.
No.
Well, that's what I'm saying is now we can say, okay, so Brian just acknowledged his primary objective is to get to 150,000 in passive income as quickly as possible. So if Brian's serious about that, he's making some changes in this portfolio to make sure it's matching what his goal is. So for me,
and it's protection for his family. The goal is the passive income to protect his family's lifestyle. So
personally, I would reinvest. I would start with the first two. Reason being, they've done their purpose. They've generated over 1,000% return on the money, right? It's like you've really yielded and made that money work as hard as it can for you. And now you've got an amazing equity position off these assets. Let's redeploy that equity into actual investment property, multifamily property, right? Like, let's be intentional about it, go for cash flow. The other two you can circle back on because they're currently generating positive cash flow and you've just recently purchased them. So that would be my recommendation, is take the equity and redeploy it from the two that have done really well for you. And they've already afforded you another property. So it's like these two properties got you over 1,000% return on your money, allowed you to buy another asset, and if redeployed, could help you buy 8 more doors that are generating 4 times the cash flow or better.
and 8 more cost seg reports.
I like it.
Raul, I have a question for you because you flip more than anyone on here, right? I think.
Raul flips
Yeah.
a lot. Is that who you asked? Is that who you asking, Mike?
Yeah, Raul.
Yeah. When you go on your listing appointments, is your first mindset, how many of these can I buy, or how do I buy this?
Yeah, so it depends because we actually target distressed properties to purchase versus a listing appointment. So it's not really, when I'm going to a listing appointment, it's most likely already decided. It's not, I kind of have a gauge of what the seller is looking for. But I mean, this, the numbers and all this, I buy a house at such a discount that I don't even have to run the numbers this deep. Because I know I'm already getting a good deal on the property. But sorry, I don't know if I answered your question or.
I just wondered because like even in my head, if like Brian, to me, you seem like you have the ability to like do really well buying your clients' homes. So like probably like 1 or 2 of these a year. Like if you could do this once or twice a year and just flip them, get in and out and make, 75 to 120,000. Like, there's your passive income goal too. If you could do 2 a year.
Yeah.
After
But
tax.
that's not passive.
Being a landlord's not passive either. Like, let's be honest. Everyone knows that.
What's your
Brian, when you flip, do you do the work or do you hire someone?
Hires a buddy.
So it's all, what's your opinion of passive? I mean, again, 140 or 100, whatever, you know what I mean? From 2 flips a year, or
Profit share is the only passive income.
it's still not passive either. You gotta go recruit.
Nick, what did you learn doing? Let's take down your screen here. What did you learn doing this? Because you're the expert, frankly, and I think there was a lot that you learned in doing this.
Yeah, hold on. Am I on a share screen right now or no?
No, I stopped it.
Okay, cool. For me, one of the things is just recognizing, like, first and foremost, Brian, thank you for being patient, because I got this asset performance test document from the real estate planner community. And the first thing I realized is, like, we talked about this, how do I make it frictionless? And like, I had to keep asking Brian for, oh, hey, actually, I need this too. Oh, hey, I forgot this number. Can you give me this too? So one, just like I kept expanding, like I created this Excel sheet based off of this process, based off of recognizing, hey, I need to analyze all 4 at the same time. In most cases, I'm only analyzing 1 property at a time. So like one of the big, right, was I created a system now to analyze a portfolio of properties and take away a meaningful information to make recommendations and suggestions. And then secondly, it's just recognizing too, just how many different variables are involved in the investment process, as far as you can win in a lot of different buckets. So just recognizing it's not one thing or another, but it's recognizing what is the client say their goal is and what are they actually serious about. Because even after you look at the numbers, it doesn't mean someone's going to do something. Right. So I think just having this document and having this conversation has really allowed also to recognize that it's taking people's conversations from emotion and turning it into logic. And once you get them in that logic conversation, they start to recognize themselves like, oh yeah, this doesn't make any sense. What are we doing? I thought we wanted to do this. We're not in alignment with what we thought we were doing. Right. So just kind of helping people recognize maybe what they intended to do and where they're currently at are not in alignment. And this helps get them where they need to go with more clarity.
Mike, what'd you learn?
Can you share the KW doc, that last one that you had?
Yeah.
So Jeremy can have Eris send it out or whatnot. Jeremy, you asked
well,
me.
it's on literally Keller Inc. Go to Keller Inc., go to resources. And
Sorry,
it's in the whole.
Email it to me, we'll share it, we'll send it out.
That's what I learned.
What?
Would you ask? I thought you were talking.
What you've learned, yeah.
He learned how to find the hold worksheet on Keller Inc.
I learned Nick goes way more in depth than I ever have in my life.
It's a really good example though of a professional going deep on this topic. I mean, a lot of times we don't. We give advice based on how much do you owe and what's it worth. Cool, I think you should sell it.
Good job, Nick. That's really good. Yeah, the plan.
Great job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope it was so good, Raul, that next call you're going to share all your systems for finding flips.
Yeah, let's keep this going. Let's try to have as many. We have 12 calls a year. I don't want to have to host a single one ever again. Raul, you're next. Walk us through your latest flip next month. Are you good?
Sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, not just the flip, but I think walking through because your business is the inverse of you attract flip deals and then the secondary is listing them. Most of us attract listings that maybe become a flip. So I think there's a lot to be learned about how the way we look at things, right, can change or how we focus on things can be different from that perspective. Because Jeremy, that helped pose a question to me of, well, you're doing flips too, Nick. So why don't you just start buying or generating more leads through your flip business instead of worrying about trying to find flips through your listings?
Yep. Exactly. Good job, guys. Nick, thank you. Mike, thank you. Brian, thank you. And Brian, you got some opportunity there.
Yeah, it's been very helpful, but I really appreciate you guys slowing down and really helping guide me to what to do next. I got some.
Are we checking in with Brian here? And let's see, February 5th then? See where he's at?
Yeah. Well, I need to find some good deals in these other markets because I think it's a better opportunity to do in these other markets so I don't drive by it. And I feel like I can get some better opportunities out there. I've got a great agent here in my market. I know that can get it done and get it sold. Yeah, I am definitely open to seeing some options, guys. So anything that you get that you feel is a good deal, like please send it to everybody here in this chat because I am seriously considering selling both these properties, roll all that money into other properties and just set it and forget it. So
before we get off, does anyone have a deal they can offer right now?
I have to go, but Eris, you can hang on. I have my monthly maps call is right now. That's why Aaron got off too. But these are early. I'm always late.
See you, Jeremy.
Anybody got anything?
I don't have anything at the moment. I'd have to look.
Yeah.
It's a duplex, but it's shitty cash flow.
All right. Well, I don't want that. That's for sure.
Stay away.
Right. Well, keep me in mind, guys. Appreciate you all very much.
Yeah.
guys.
Great call, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.